Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, managing editor of Canada's podcast, Taking Care of Business today with Karen Yolevski, who is COO of Royal LePage Real Estate Services. Thanks, Karen, for joining us today.
For having me.
Okay, we're going to talk about an interesting report that Royal LePage has put out about co-ownership in Canada when it comes to residential real estate. What did the report basically find, Karen?
Well, a few things. So first off, for the people that we surveyed, 6% of those surveyed are in a co-ownership situation. And what that means is that they're owning a property with someone who isn't their spouse or significant other. There could be a parent or a friend, and we'll probably get into a bit more of that. But the second thing that we understood from our survey was we surveyed our own people, our own realtors here at Royal LePage as well. And co-ownership is on the rise. So since the pandemic, our agents are telling us that they're seeing more and more of co-ownership. The reason for that, which also came out from our survey, is primarily affordability. We saw big numbers around that reason for co-owning a property, over 70%. And when we looked at people between the ages of 25 and 34, it was over 80%. So affordability is creating more interest in this type of ownership.
So let's talk, first of all, a little bit about the trend and where you see it going. House prices aren't coming down. Interest rates aren't coming down. So do you foresee, as we move into the future, just this co-ownership trend just continuing to increase?
It's very likely that it would, based on what we saw from those survey results. The people that are in a co-ownership situation, we asked them if the interest rate increases that we saw last year, if they had an impact. And what we saw was that 30% of the people had purchased after the Bank of Canada had started to raise those rates. And based on how many people told us it was because of affordability, we know that affordability is a major issue. Rate increases are hampering affordability for many people. And as long as rates are staying high and prices are not coming down, it's likely we will continue to see this. One of the other interesting things that came from our research was that people are most often buying with a parent. So in that situation, many times the parent is the one helping the adult child buy the property because they don't have enough funds on their own to do so.
Now, when you're talking about that, I'm just curious: is it because the say young people can't accumulate enough for a down payment? Is that one of the factors?
Certainly one of the factors. So we know saving for the down payment for first-time buyers is one of the larger challenges because it's a significant sum of money. Regardless of how much the house costs, it's going to be probably the biggest deposit you're going to make, especially in your younger adult years. However, we also have the mortgage qualifications that have become more difficult as interest rates have risen over the last year. So if you're qualifying for an interest rate that's, let's say, 6%, when you add on the stress test on top of that, now you're looking at 2% more, so 8%. And some people are having to either step to the sidelines or, in cases of co-ownership, go in with somebody else in order to actually qualify. So more income under their application, perhaps some other equity under their application to help them bridge that gap.
Mm-hmm. Now, when in your survey, when you're looking at the types of homes that people are co-owning, what are we seeing there? Are there any interesting trends there?
There are. So what we saw in the survey is the most common type of home that people are buying in this model is the single family detached home. So your typical larger home, that could be for a couple of reasons. We did see from the survey that people are sometimes living together in the home. So the parent and the child, that can be because of affordability, but often is because of childcare needs, or potentially needs for taking care of an elderly parent, as an example. So a bigger home can hold more people. That would make more sense. It's going to be one of those detached homes.
Yeah.
Also, potentially people that are looking at recreational property, those cabins, cottages, things like that, those typically tend to be detached as well. So I think that that's why we saw that as our number one category.
Okay, now we mentioned obviously parents, and it probably makes the bulk of the co-ownership situations. But what other things or other dynamics are we seeing in terms of co-ownership?
We're seeing quite a few different variations. So we're seeing siblings, we're seeing friends, we're seeing investors coming together to purchase investor properties, colleagues, people that have the willingness and like-mindedness, because sometimes they're not living in the home. So that opens up a different category. If you're going to live together, perhaps it makes most sense that it might be a parent or potentially a sibling. But if it's going to be an investment property or a property you don't use all the time, like a cottage, for example, that opens up who you might be considering to purchase with. A friend might make sense, or if it's pure investment property, it could be an investment partner.
Okay. Last question I had for you, Karen, is when you look at this type of arrangement, what are the things that people should consider entering into this type of a co-ownership arrangement?
Very important considerations. So there's sort of two buckets there. One is going to be a financial bucket, and one is going to be a division of labor and both say rules bucket, almost like a condominium that has its rules that all the residents are governed by. So on the financial side, you want to be able to say you have a contract in writing between all the parties on title that are, it's very clear as to who is responsible for what financially, how much, when, and what happens if one or more parties can't make those payments. What is going to happen if you have to sell the property or someone wants to sell the property? So these are all the questions that the co-owners should be asking one another, and they should be going to get some legal assistance to write up a contract that works for everyone at the outset. In the other bucket, we're talking about the labor, the chores, the use of the property.
Yeah.
Those are also ground rules. You'll want to have ground rules set out in advance. How many weeks are you using the property? Who is responsible for stocking the fridge and making sure things are left swept up and clean? Work all of that out in advance so that you don't have questions down the road and your experience can be enjoyable and fruitful for you.
Okay, I lied. I do have one more question. And I don't know if this is in your survey at all, but maybe more anecdotally. I would assume that in markets like Toronto and Vancouver, this will be more popular simply because of the cost of homes in those markets.
It's not covered in our survey specifically. However, you are right. Our larger urban centers are where homes are most expensive. And given how strongly the data pointed to the fact that affordability was driving this trend, it does make sense that we may see more of this in our larger centers as time goes on and this type of ownership becomes more common.
All right. Thank you very much, Karen, for joining us today.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, that was Karen Yolevski, who is COO of Royal LePage Real Estate Services. I'm Mario Toneguzzi, Managing Editor of Canada's podcast, Taking Care of Business. Thanks for joining us today.